All right, so this is round 4 between Sevi as white and Calvin as black. This video is definitely going to be the longest, so bear with me, but there's just a billion opportunities that happened in this game, and it was just crazy. So, going back to the very start, so both players opened with a pretty reasonable opening strategy. They got pretty much all their pieces out, eventually castled, and while white had like a slight advantage out of the opening, it was perfectly playable for both sides, and that wasn't decisive. So kind of skip through both of those moves. Sevi got his kind of ideal structure. This is the little Meraxi bind, as it's called. Technically, with the pawn on d3, it's not a Meraxi bind, but this is kind of a natural follow-up move. Sometimes you can get in a situation where this pawn is weak in the long term, just because once the pieces get developed and you've castled, usually it can be good, but sometimes you run into problems. But if you can maintain this hold in the center, because you could just really never play this move, or at least you'll lose pieces if you do. Anyways, let's see. Going through, not all the moves are engine highly recommended, but you know they've got all their pieces out. Both players have got all their pieces out, and they both castle kind of around the same time. So here we're pretty much in the middle game for sure at this point. Completely out of the opening, all pieces are developed, and castles happened. Basically, what it wants Sevi to do right here is eventually move both of his rooks over on this side of the board and then just start blasting. And it wants Calvin to make a few defensive moves of his own, and possibly eventually he'll be able to have his own kind of attack over here on the king. These pawns are not the most amazing pawns because there's not 3 of them, because you've lost this F pawn here, which doesn't probably seem to be necessarily a benefit. But basically, since all the pieces are over here on this side of the board, yeah, white has an attack, but these pieces are over here, and the attack's going to happen over here. Whereas black's attacks is going to happen over here, and all his pieces are already on that side of the board. So really the game's equal here, and white has like a 0.4 advantage, so it's perfectly normal. But both players have a very reasonable plan. This is a very complicated blunder because basically it winds up in a situation where black kind of has an extra pawn, or at least just a positional advantage. And these are just the engine moves, which are, again, it's not all obvious. You start with d takes c5, which again is not all obvious, because doesn't it seem like after takes right here that you could risk either, double stacking these pawns and having a really weak king, or you're just going to lose an extra pawn because this whole exchange is not immediately obvious. There's like a whole shuffling of pieces around here that is very difficult, and you wind up in a situation where both sides have 2 rooks, both sides have a minor piece, but technically black's maybe a little bit better because these pawns are weak and disconnected. If you go for a trade here, like this is totally fine. And these pieces are really weak, basically, because they're just very dependent on each other, and it's kind of hard to move them. You can't really move this one, or you're going to lose a piece. You move this one, you're going to lose the other one. So it's actually pretty... I mean, yes, there's a check right here, but that's like the 5th move. So it's not crazy. So anyways, not all obvious in the game, so totally surprised both players missed that. That is like a... Right here is like almost a point or a +2 advantage for black, so that's pretty good, but totally makes sense that they didn't do that. And this basically, if you go back to this situation, you can't take with this pawn, because then you do wind up in this situation where white just has this redonkulous open file, and it's super easy to do a lot of like discovered checks. So let's just say black just messes around and does something stupid here, and then they're just like, I'll move my knight out. So this is random moves. You can even start with, well, you can't start with the check now because of this move, so let me make a different random move. Let's start an attack. You can even do something kind of silly like this, and that's pretty Mongo. It's like +4 for white, so this is just a really weak king at this point. Suspicious, very suspicious. Anyways, going back to before all this nonsense started, Calvin played d5 instead. Sevi is up like 1.5 in this position, and what it wants him to do is just the most obvious move. This move seems a little suspicious. It just wants you to move the knight back here, and it basically says like, things are a little weak. Unfortunately, but very fortunately for the viewers, Sevi did the very tactical, the very sharp, but the very equal, but very flashy knight d6, which is super fun. This is better for black in the long run if Calvin does this very long, tenuous... It doesn't win black a piece, but it makes black better, because basically here's what happens. You take, and then take back. It's check. You have to block with the knight so you don't let the pawn take the knight over here. You block with the knight, then you play b5, so you're going to lose that piece. But at the end of the day, things get traded off, and black's up a pawn. So, better for black there. That didn't happen. Knight d6 check, and another move, which basically gives white a pretty big advantage, but I understand why he did that, and I think Calvin just didn't see... he didn't see the benefit of taking this piece and getting in check, because it looked like he was just going to lose the knight, and I think Calvin missed that. Going on, take. Now this is where it gets a little unfortunate, because what the computer wants Calvin to do is, well, I'll show you what it wants him to do. It wants him to move the knight back, then the pawn gets pushed. You have to move the knight out of the way, or you're going to lose the knight. Move the knight, push the pawn, takes. Well, or you can start right here. You don't have to take. Technically, the engine wants you to do this move. But the difference is black has 3 of white's pawns and a knight, and white has a bishop, a knight, and a pawn. So, like, yes, white's up. It's a whole piece. But material's close to equal. White does have a big advantage, but it's a little better. The only problem is what Calvin did essentially is the same thing. So look at this, basically the end position here. Where this happens, let's just imagine you take here and this happens. So again, white still has that +1. What Calvin basically did was knight c4, which results in this situation where, and then you did this. It's the same thing, except you're already down the knight because Calvin accidentally lost it. So it's the exact same situation, basically, except there's no knight right here. So you take with the king. All the pawns are in the same place except for this pawn, which was back here. It's the exact same thing. It's just black has 1 less piece, which is unfortunate. Now, we honestly were not sure if Sevi was going to see that move, because it looked for a long time like Sevi didn't see that the knight was hanging. And so super exciting to watch at this point, and then Sevi started smiling, and we were like, he's got it. He's got it. So that was really fun to see. These are all the best moves. I think we're all surprised to see this, because isn't that scary? Isn't that suspicious? Even if you... Isn't this like a little frightening to look at? And this is like 8.9 for white here. So interested in why that didn't happen. Now, this is also like another good move. Interestingly, Kimbir says here's the best move, even more than this pawn. It's basically just saying, like, here's why it's good. You do this. Let's just say some random moves. You're still threatening this, because, yeah, the knight's here, but, like, the knight can never leave, because if the knight leaves, then you just push this and you get destroyed. But also, like, it's going to be my turn next move, and I get to play this, and how you're going to stop me, and this is weak, and I can shuffle my pieces over here, and there's all these crazy moves, and I can get my knight into the game, and basically it's tough for black here. So this was a really interesting part. I think both players saw it, where basically the king goes back, you can't take the queen. You have to take the knight, because if you don't, this amazing sequence happens, and actually black's winning at this point, which would have been crazy to see. So Sevi took the knight with the knight, which is the correct move, and it allows Calvin to keep his queen, which keeps the game very double-edged, but white has like a 9-point advantage here. Things go on. Basically, Sevi went from +10 to +5 right here, because, yeah, it still works at the end of the day, and white's still going to be up material, but not as much as he could have been. Better to keep all the pieces and just crush black if you can do it. But I think Sevi went for the very pragmatic approach of, I'm up material. Even if this lessens my lead, I'm still going to be up, and I'd rather have to deal with less pieces. That works. basically it is correct to do what Sevi did, take with the bishop here, because if you don't, and you start with taking a rook, for instance, and exposing this attack on the queen, you get this crazy sequence where the engine recommends this, and it's fine. It's still winning for white because white has the 2 bishops and a knight. Even though you gotta be a little careful, there's some pressure here. 2 bishops and a knight versus a knight or a bishop and a rook. So it's still better material considering this king is just kind of suspicious. So it takes him so long to get out. But Sevi just did the correct thing and took bishop c3 first, waiting because it doesn't matter if you move these rooks out of the way. You've still got the attack here. So anyways, Sevi did this, which I think both of us, when we were watching the game, were like, why not take the other knight? Because now you're allowing him to stack the rooks. The crazy thing is the engine basically says, if you fool, the rooks are already stacked. If you take this, you start with this. Oh, you start with this check. King goes over here. It's the same material, except Calvin just has one more pawn than he would have had, and this queen is just absolutely menacing right there. And yeah, you could like move here, but what's that going to accomplish? Now you're just attacking more pieces. So the game's a little closer to equal now, like a 2.8 for white. So that didn't happen. He took there, stacked here. That was actually the best move. So engine really wants him to do this and just stack these Mongo rooks. Calvin looked at this, or Sevi looked at this and didn't like it because I think he saw queen d3. But at the end of the day, it's kind of crazy. You can take this, and this is still protected because of the bishop. So you might even have some crazy like discovered attacks that will just keep up the advantage. So instead he did this, which then Calvin played c2, which is the best move basically, or one of the best moves, because it prevents this from happening because this piece will be unoffended. Okay, Blair was with me when this game happened, and I said, I can't wait. This is like my favorite moment from the tournament because I felt just like I had figured something out. I can't wait for the moment in this game where bishop takes b6 is the correct move. Because I just like, obviously it makes sense. Take, like this isn't the right time to play it, but take here, this pawn gets to go forward. There's going to be some Mongo attack. And so we reach this point right here. This isn't technically the best move, but it forces something to happen here. And then Calvin moves to a4. And this is the crazy point where bishops takes b6 is the correct move. Because you take here, basically, and, like, it wants you to do this, which just seems crazy because you're going to win a pawn, and bishop c5 is there, keeping everything protected. So basically, at the end of the day, everything's still protected, but then you're just going to get destroyed with this. So, like, there's a way that keeps the game alive, but it can't be good. So I was so excited to see that was a possibility when I did the game review, because basically this crazy sequence happens, and then if you take, which is not good, you just get destroyed. And that's no good, and it's mate in 3. So really cool to see that move. Sevi lost his mind a little bit here, and I think he took the theme too far, which worked for him so far, which was, I'm going to get rid of the pieces so things are stable. He took that a little too far and lost his mind, and it worked, but it shouldn't have. Takes. So basically, straight up, this just doesn't work. Calvin thought about it, looked for any tricks, but there aren't any tricks. You just take the bishop, and now it's just 2 rooks versus a queen and a rook, which is just horrible. Unfortunately, Sevi saw this move, and Calvin saw the move too. But what Calvin wasn't able to figure out was basically there's only 2 squares you can go to. C8 keeps the game very in black's favor, and then D8 draws the game for very complicated reasons, basically. You do this, takes, and it's a queen versus a queen, and like technically the game's drawn, but suspicious. I wouldn't want to play this. If I was Sevi, I would never want to allow this because now it's just perfectly equal again. Unfortunately, the best move is queen c8, just because after this whole sequence of events, black's got nothing. It's a queen versus a rook. You can never move this rook off the 7th rank because then the pawn falls. So, you know, you got to be careful. Maybe even start with a move like this. You know, it's not black's turn to move, but do this, threaten this, keep this pawn protected. But at the end of the day, black's going to destroy white. So That doesn't happen. Unfortunately, Calvin plays this move, and it just falls into... This is a line that Sevi saw. It wasn't forced, but Sevi figured it out. And now, technically, it's mate in 11, but the game goes on. So, very exciting game. Really exciting to watch you two guys play, and I can't wait for the next one.